1940. Britain is under the bombs. Millions of children are separated from their family. Who could speak to their fear? The answer surprised the world. A 14-year-old girl, a royal princess. She was to become the voice of hope for a nation. But how could she find the words when she was afraid herself? The story of a moment that changed Princess Elizabeth forever. The October evening of 1940 hung over Windsor Castle, shrouding it in a heavy stillness. Outside, everything seemed calm, but within the thick stone walls, the silence was deceptive. Princess Elizabeth sat at an oak table, a sheet of paper with the speech text laid out before her. A lamp beside her illuminated the neatly typed lines. Her fingers trembled slightly as she ran them along the edges of the paper. She knew that something entirely new awaited her. Today, her voice would be heard by children across Britain and even beyond. Children who, like her, had been separated from their families by the war. This was at the request of the Prime Minister himself, Winston Churchill. He, more than anyone, knew how to find the right words. But now, she was being asked to become the voice that would help children endure their fears. "I'm just a girl," Elizabeth thought, staring at her reflection in the window pane. Why me? In the room with her sat Margaret. Being with her younger sister always made things a little easier. Margaret's boundless energy distracted from heavier thoughts. She chattered endlessly, perched on the windowsill, occasionally humming something cheerful. "Lilibet, have you figured out how you'll sound yet?" Margaret asked, hopping down to the floor. "Maybe I should give you some tips. I am a real expert, after all." Elizabeth smiled, though her heart still felt heavy. She tried to recall how Churchill himself had sounded when he spoke about this idea. "Your voice, Your Highness," he had said, "is exactly what the children need right now. You and your sister understand what separation feels like, and that's what will make your words sincere." Those words had stuck with her. But how could she talk about separation when she herself missed her parents so deeply? The King and Queen remained in London, at Buckingham Palace, despite the bombings. Elizabeth missed them terribly. Letters arrived often, but they couldn't replace the warmth of an embrace or her mother's soothing voice, which always found a way to comfort her. "Lilibet, are you listening to me?" Margaret interrupted again, dragging a chair over and sitting across from her. "It's just a speech. You just have to tell the kids everything will be okay. They'll believe you." Elizabeth looked up at her. She knew Margaret was right, but how could she say it in a way that made them truly believe? "Do you think they'll hear in my voice that I understand them?" she finally asked. "Of course!" Margaret clapped her hands. "You have such a beautiful voice. Even Papa said so." Her sister glanced at the text and read the first lines aloud. "Thousands of you have had to leave your homes and be separated from your families." She paused for a moment, then added, "And if anything goes wrong, I'll say my goodnight, children, so well that no one will be able to resist smiling." Elizabeth couldn't help but laugh. For a moment, the tension melted away. She looked at her younger sister and felt a gentle warmth spreading through her chest. Everything would be fine. She had to do this. Not for herself, but for all the children who, like her, were separated from their loved ones. A technician from the BBC entered the room. "Your Highness, we're ready to begin," he said with a slight bow. Elizabeth nodded. She took a deep breath and tightly gripped the sheet of paper. For a moment, her gaze lingered on the lamp, then shifted to the microphone. "Everything will be fine," she quietly told herself. "Well, go on, Lilibet," Margaret winked. "You've got this." Elizabeth stood and approached the microphone. If you enjoy this story and want to hear more about forgotten destinies and royal intrigues, subscribe. There are many more fascinating stories ahead. The room fell silent. Elizabeth stood in front of the microphone, trying to steady her breathing. The sound engineer gave a signal. Everything was ready. The sheet of paper in her hands seemed heavier now, as though the words on it had gained weight with the awareness of their importance. She cast a quick glance at Margaret, who sat nearby, her back straight as though she too was preparing for her small role at the end. "You've got this, Lilibet." Margaret's voice echoed in her mind, words spoken just moments ago from the windowsill. Those words, like an invisible thread, anchored her to reality. Elizabeth leaned slightly toward the microphone. The first words caught in her throat. "What if I mess up?" flashed through her mind. But then, she remembered Churchill's advice. They don't need to hear a princess. They need to hear someone just like them. Speak from the heart. She took a breath, tilting her head slightly forward, and finally began. "Thousands of you have had to leave your homes and be separated from your families. My sister Margaret Rose and I know very well what it is like." Her voice trembled at first, but grew steadier with each word. She spoke as though addressing every single child listening to the broadcast. She wanted them to know they were not alone. In her mind, she pictured a boy sent to a distant village to live with strangers. A girl who, like her, missed her parents. Elizabeth felt she was speaking for them. To those of you who have found yourselves in new surroundings, we send a message of heartfelt sympathy. You are not forgotten. We pray for you, for your fathers and mothers. Her voice softened almost to a whisper, as though she wanted these words to reach each child individually. In her imagination, she saw their faces, some tear-streaked, but all leaning toward this voice of hope. Behind her, Margaret had stopped fidgeting in her chair. She was listening intently, the way she would listen to a bedtime story. Elizabeth caught a glimpse of her and felt a new surge of confidence. We know that in the end, everything will be all right. When the day comes that the world is at peace again, we will meet each other once more. Her final words carried a warmth and resolve she hadn't known she possessed. Now it was Margaret's turn. Elizabeth gave her a small nod, as though inviting her to the microphone. Margaret, with her usual ease, stepped forward and declared, "Good night, children." Her voice was high-pitched and clear, like a bell. "Good night, and good luck to you all," Elizabeth concluded. She stepped back from the microphone and finally let out a deep breath. Her hands, still holding the sheet of paper, trembled slightly, but her face was calm. The room was silent for a moment. Several BBC technicians exchanged glances before one of them smiled and quietly said, "That was wonderful, Your Highness." Margaret clapped her hands, delighted, like a child who had just accomplished something important. Elizabeth, however, stood still, as though she hadn't yet fully processed that it was over. "You did it, Lilibet," Margaret finally said, running up to her sister and wrapping an arm around her shoulders. "You were brilliant." Elizabeth responded with a faint but sincere smile. Deep down, she realized that this moment was not just important for those who had heard her, but also for herself. She felt, for the first time, that she was part of something greater, the hopes of her nation. By the time they left the makeshift studio, night had already enveloped Windsor Castle in darkness. The corridors felt empty and echoed with their footsteps. Though somewhere far off, the sound of servants moving about broke the stillness. Margaret walked ahead, as if nothing extraordinary had happened. Elizabeth followed more slowly, her thoughts preoccupied with the idea that, at this very moment, her voice was echoing through thousands of homes across Britain. She tried to imagine the small boys and girls sitting by their radios. Perhaps some of them, like her, missed their parents terribly. Perhaps for the first time that day, someone had felt a glimmer of warmth upon hearing her words. The thought made her steps feel a little lighter. In another part of the country, in London, King George VI sat in his office at Buckingham Palace. On the desk before him rested a small radio. He had just finished listening to his daughter's broadcast. The room was empty, and for a moment, he allowed himself to relax, leaning back in his chair. At the start of the war, Churchill had suggested that his eldest daughter, the 14-year-old princess, address the children of Britain. George had refused at first. He didn't want his daughters to become part of public life so soon. Elizabeth and Margaret were meant to remain safe, far from public attention. But Churchill had been insistent. "Your daughters are a symbol of resilience for all of Britain. Their voices can comfort those who are suffering. We cannot stay silent, Your Majesty." Reluctantly, George had agreed. And now, as he listened to the voice of his eldest daughter, he realized Churchill had been right. Her words had sounded so genuine, so warm. As she spoke of separation, he didn't just hear a prepared speech. He heard her own feelings. She wasn't merely speaking, she was offering solace. A memory surfaced, unbidden, of a much younger Elizabeth reciting a poem to the family for the first time. Even then, he had noticed her unusual composure, her ability to find the right words. And now, he saw that little girl transformed into a young woman, ready to take her place as part of what it meant to be a Windsor. When Margaret's cheerful, "Good night, children," rang out at the end, he couldn't help but smile. Tears of pride welled in his eyes, but he quickly brushed them away with the back of his hand. "Lilibet, my Lilibet," he thought to himself. His heart swelled with pride. She had done it. She hadn't just managed, she had surpassed his expectations. George rose from his chair and walked to the window, gazing out at the London night. He thought of his daughters, now at Windsor. They were far away, but he felt closer to them than ever before. "Churchill was right," he murmured. "She's already becoming the person I always hoped she would be." Elizabeth paused by a window, gazing up at the night sky. She wondered if her parents had been listening. Her heart quickened slightly at the thought. She hoped they were proud. Deep down, she felt that this moment had changed not just her, but her connection with them. One day, she would learn how her father had heard in her voice not just a princess, but a future queen. She stepped into her sister's room, closing the door behind her, and sat down beside Margaret. Tomorrow would bring everything anew. Fresh news, fresh challenges. But for today, she had done everything she could. And that was enough. If you enjoy experiencing history through storytelling, make sure to subscribe. Many more fascinating tales await. This story is inspired by real events but includes elements of artistic fiction. Up next, you will see a list of historical facts that formed its foundation.